Welcome to the Decentralized Careers Podcast with your host, Benjamin Mena.
I'm excited about this episode of the Decentralized Careers Podcast. I have my guest, Mike Benzaken, here with me, who is the founder and president of the Citizen Warrior Foundation. And one of the cool things about the Citizen Warrior Foundation is there are a lot of great things about the Web3 and the blockchain space, and a lot of ideas that, originally what everybody got so excited about. But as things have changed and things have centralized, there's been huge impacts on the entire community. There's been huge impacts on, just the normal person. And Mike Benz is here building out a community and building out a culture to bring the original ideas of the crypto space back into the forefront. So Mike, welcome to the Decentralized Careers Podcast. And do you want to kind of talk a little more about yourself?
Thank you so much, Ben. Yeah, so just briefly, what got me here, I think would be a good maybe introduction to your audience. So I used to run SME life science multinational, so I used to do a lot of federal contracting. And I would see relative to U.S. aid, so 1% of U.S. GDP goes over to two areas, foreign disaster relief and economic development. And so we did a lot on both, but most on the foreign disaster relief. And so we calculated, and then we came in because we knew the head of procurement at the Hill. And it's funny, I don't know who said it first, but we said, roughly 25 cents on every dollar before soft margin, because you're working with NGOs, is being received in the form of goods and service by the intended recipient. And we said 35 cents. He said, no, 25 cents. And we're like, wow. Okay, so what does this mean? Let's just go round numbers, whatever it is. Let's say 50 cents that's sent over. Every dollar, 50 cents is being received. So then at that point, I realized, wow. So we can cut the tax burden in half to the taxpayer, or we can double the amount of good that we're doing, assuming that the money is being well spent, at least on the foreign disaster relief end. It's arguably being well spent on the econ dev, a little less. But there is an emergent tech solution to that. So, but long story short, we had to engage in a whole bunch of things. A bunch of the Voyager reports came out that were verified. I'm like, we're going to change our supply chain. The whole board wasn't on, so I sold my position as chair and as CEO, and I was out. Went into emergent tech, learned a bit about finance. Right, took my the position that I sold, took the capital, deployed it, increased it, and then moved it into other areas, and then really got into how blockchain and Web3 ID can solve a lot of the soft diplomacy issues, the foreign funding of whatever it is we're funding. Okay, foreign disaster relief, sure, economic development, sure. But the idea is that it is tracking longitudinally over time the effect that those monies have had, and to be able to verify those monies have been received, or identify potential points of leakage. Right? Did anything go off chain? Did the dollar turn into 50 cents? And we'll all know it. Right. So it's okay. So then we're like, okay, the next step is the narrative, because we can't just go up to the government and say, let's put all taxpayer-funded activities on the chain. This is too radical, although there are more and more bullish on blockchain, which is like really, to me, makes me very optimistic.
I mean, that's actually one of the things that got me excited about the blockchain Web3 spaces. I was in some conversations with some legacy government agencies, and they're just like, oh yeah, this next project, that we're looking at building out in the future of, this agency, like we're going to need to put this stuff on the blockchain. And it was kind of like an aha moment. For me, you saw those NFTs, you saw this and you saw that, and you're like, wait, these government agencies are talking about the future of the blockchain. This is something that I need to get excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, dollar. If people are concerned about embezzlement, if they're concerned about these type of things, the dollar is the worst vehicle.
It's all trackable on the blockchain.
Exactly. Everything's all trackable on the blockchain. And of course, there can be mixers and things like that. These things are being resolved. And I think they should be. Open Ledger is great. Again, your name is not pinned against your wallet. You can have on-chain, off-chain web ID. So the only way someone could pin you is through Just Cause, right? So, we still have our privacy intact. Of course, there's a sliding slope, but now we're talking years down the line but getting back to what we were talking about, okay, so how can the blockchain be deployed now where it can affect the narrative, where the people who put the people in power, who get to make the legislative decisions, who they can now understand what it is. Because really, it's like the aim is to pull the nerd out of tech and to make it digestible by the common person who can then use it to safeguard like themselves and families, maybe become an investor, for example, or just simply have more control over different elements of their life, such as, let me give you a prime example. So you're a small business, let's say, right? Small business, and you are looking to bring on a partner, you want to increase your valuation. And so you have a Facebook following that took you 10 years to build. This is, Web 2, walled garden type internet stuff.
Yep.
And you want to put that on your balance sheet because it's not generating much revenue, but the intangible brand value of that, there's something there because, of course, if you introduce a line, right, or you move them over to 5 other places, there's a huge amount of revenue growth that could go there. So Web3 would fundamentally change the way valuations are made relative to companies and would fundamentally change the way that VCs would therefore have to approach, let's say, small companies. So when I see these new series of economic phenomena happening right now, which is squeezing the small business, the SME in a major way, these guys are getting burned into ash. I mean, it's not good. That being able to have the followers that they build trust in, because trust is valuable, to put it on your balance sheet as you're bringing on a partner, or you're getting, let's say, you want to, you're putting your company up to have access to, cash, or you're putting up as collateral to have access to growth or whatever it is. Although, I don't know when's the best time to do that given all the wins, but the point is that it's going to fundamentally change everything. And the media space, I think, is ripe now for the change, so we're focusing on that. The finance, obviously, focusing on that. And lastly, the foundation is set up to make sure, briefly, that we educate, that we organize, and that we R&D goods and services to protect consumers before we're front-run by the regulators, so that there are already smart contract triggering safety rails in place. So let's say a CFI company is over-leveraged.
Well, yeah, let's talk about protecting the consumers.
I don't want to jump the gun.
Yeah, no, talk about protecting the consumers. There's if you've been in this space for the past year, there's been so much happening with Three Arrows Capital, Voyager, Celsius. I could just keep on going on. And, that I believe, I lost pretty much all my crypto in Voyager, unfortunately. Thought it was a great place. I was actually part of the original USD when they sold it off to Voyager. But, I'll be fine. But I know there's a lot of people that...
By FTX, right? On 20 cents on the dollar, something like that?
It's I'm literally expecting nothing out of all that. It's annoying.
Yeah.
But what hurts the most is, there are so many other people that put everything they had into that, trusting the system and trusting that this is going to be the future. And I think, I'll let you jump into everything, but I think it's hurt the next few years of the blockchain Web3 space just because of some stupidity and it being centralized. But yeah, Mike, go ahead and jump in.
No, you're 100% right. CFI just screwed every emergent tech investor that there is. And there's a lot of anger by those of us who see this as a freedom opt-out, as the next evolution of technology that will ensure individual sovereignty and prevent the erosion of our bedrock institutions when properly implemented over time. And we saw consumer adoption going up. We're still seeing consumer adoption going up. But CFI, all the lending platforms, if they're not in trouble, they will be in trouble, or they're introducing a token that's making them paper solvent, above water and not having to file. And they're playing games. We'll see how long that lasts. But CFI should be a red flag to us to say, okay, if we are going to allow, so of course we're going to allow because we're not government, we're not going to prevent it by fiat. But if these companies are going to come on board, there are some basic standards that they should adopt to, some regulatory standards. And now, mind you, regulatory doesn't have to be, you go through, let's say it's medicine, you're going through the US FDA. In Europe, they have another standard. So they have TÜV, which is pseudo-governmental, right? But then they have ISO, which would be private companies that are going around. They have to report back to TÜV. So while there is some unilateral dictate, the actual analysis and the price barrier of the regulatory standard to meet the compliance matters is drastically lower. So when you're putting money, and then having these terms of services that are changing over time, and them not being accepted, and then that's like really being used right now to crush these guys in the earnings groups. And I'm among them as well. Like you got burned in Voyager, I got burned in Celsius. My brother got burned pretty badly in Celsius. So we're heavily in that space right now, looking at it. And our consumer protection protocols that could be attached to their financials, where the financials are not different from what would otherwise be just tracking on-chain movement, and it would be able to trigger to know when they've passed a certain threshold. And then the consumer would have to accept voluntarily that they're willing to accept that in order to obtain that yield, or then they can move it over to another account under a different TOS. But really, CeFi has set back the space, and depending on the outcome of Celsius, which was the largest CeFi platform of the bunch that, haven't done so well, or done terribly, the outcome is going to be very important. Not only to the people who it crushed, and it did crush too many people, but to the industry as a whole. And we need to make sure that there is a reasonable bid on the assets and on the equity of the company to avoid a Chapter 7 or like an FTX buyout, right? And that this sets some sort of precedent, and that we're able to do so in such a way that sidesteps regulatory hurdles that would prevent it. So we'd be moving it into, let's say, move all the coins, and this would help restructure it and also make it whole, because big losses were taken on smaller cap coins. So move it into Bitcoin and Ethereum and USDC, for example, and then depart equity, and then people could take a haircut and leave, or they could hold it for a specific period. This could happen. This can happen.
I love the idea that you have, like with the Citizen Warrior Foundation, of like the proposal where if so much gets leverage or a certain point, like it notifies everybody. Because I mean, at least for Voyager, my God, the amount of like marketing that they sent me that everything was safe and it was all in their books. Come to find out that they sent like so much of their capital over to one organization, not like many organizations. They didn't spread it. It was all sent to one organization. Like, my God, it was like setting it up for failure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know who these guys who run their compliance office, I don't know how they're choosing their CFOs, how they're doing the risk management. Heck, to be honest, I've talked to a lot of these DAO guys, and like, again, I don't want to poo-poo on the industry because, in short, I hate saying the cryptosphere. I hate saying it because it doesn't differentiate between the emergent tech within it. And then also it doesn't then differentiate the good players from the bad players. But there are basic quality, so there's quality management systems. And to start a DAO, and it's really said you don't need to, let's say, be well-versed in quality control, quality testing, quality assurance. And so there should be introduced by the people, for the people, not through government fiat, protocols that can mitigate risk so that, number one, it stimulates trust. It stimulates VC inflow, right? And then, and again, this helps the people because with these mechanisms, let's say with this Web3 ID where you can move your followers from one platform, they can't just decide you're over. Oh, you don't like ESG? Oh, okay. We're going to shut down your page. I don't care you have 200,000 followers. I don't care. Bye-bye. Yeah, no. And then you can just, go on to another platform, continue generating revenue, or at least it's on your balance sheet, and now you have your company as collateral, take out cash, cover whatever spread you need to. We cannot allow this to hurt the space. That's why it does involve a collective effort. And CWF is organizing that collective effort with its partners. Because if it wasn't for our partners, there is no way we would have been able to get as far as we have. Like, for real. Like, we're so blessed.
I want to switch gears. You just mentioned that, you don't like to classify everything as the crypto sphere. The emergent tech. What are some of the most exciting emergent tech that you see coming out in the next few years from this space?
Well, I mean, so we can get into things like utility NFTs, or we can go so far as to say things that incorporate machine learning, things that incorporate AI. I mean, that would be really emergent tech, but that's more, let's say, in the private equity or people who are early stage VC investors. But in terms of the people, the retail investors in looking at CoinMarketCap, so we'll talk about NFTs, right? So utility NFTs are fantastic, and there are a variety of utilities that we see as having long-standing value once they become legal tender. So to execute a smart contract and for that agreement to be legal tender as recognized by the state, it would fundamentally change, I'm going to say, game theory in general relative to transactions. So that's going to just change the way that we interact over time, over space, with whom we choose to interact, etc. Web3 ID. Right now, it's being I'd say pioneered. So we have our own cast, and we interviewed Lisa CCAT DeLusa, she's the pioneer of Web3 ID. And she's brilliant, right? She's worked for IBM for like 20 years. And so what they're doing is they're doing a curated on-chain, off-chain ID, where it's essentially like your profile on Facebook. But again, it brings the asset, right? So all the followers, all the content, all the life force that you spilled into whatever this thing is, it allows you to bring it to different hubs that have different terms of service and different standards and different this and different that. So yeah, utility NFTs are fantastic relative to, so they act as what? Domains. Right, so now it's not like owned by. Well, so we can say that Google doesn't own the apparatus, but they sort of maybe have the influence. So the idea is that an uncensorable. There's something very good there, but then also there's risk there as well, right? It has to be mitigated. But we can get into that, and then access is very interesting. That NFT now can give you access to, let's say, a VC who would also act as an advisor. Or can give you access to a capital pool that you would never have access to, or just simply an advisor who can tell you maybe move in this direction, so you can have access to this VC who would be a mentor who has access to this. So it allows people from across the world, no matter their proximity to a city or the proximity to a city with large capital pools. I mean, in the U.S. there's like 3 essentially large capital pools, and then outside that it's like small kind of private equity interest type stuff, but like. It can connect the guy from some agrarian area in Bangladesh to a capital pool in New York City, and that intellectual capital will not be forfeit. And then therefore, innovation? What are we seeing? We're seeing a boom of innovation if and when that happens. That's why we cannot allow consumer adoption to slow, which is why we must take it upon ourselves, our responsibility, to put consumer protection protocols, standards, and also impressing on the youth who are the Web3 developers. I mean, these guys are young, and these guys are like really smart.
I mean, some of these these young developers just run circles around. Some of these we see as a senior developer, like they just work some magic. It's exciting what's happening with them.
Absolutely, and look at in India right now too. Just the brilliance that's coming out of India right now. Unreal. And which is another reason why, again, we want to help stateside so that not everyone, relies on India, but also at the same time we want to have the innovation help everybody because it does raise votes. So I mean, we're playing a balancing act. CWF is very much so in the middle of this balancing act. It's how much. It's there has to be consumer protections. We want to oust all the bad guys and make sure that they're held to account for being bad. But at the same time, we don't want to stop what is the freedom, it's the freedom safe rail. It's the opt out in the event ish goes down. It's the mechanisms that can actually fortify our existing bedrock institutions and prevent further decay or increase transparency or fundamentally change game theory where corruption is less likely to occur or is actually approaching zero just based on the nature of the design of the mechanism whereby funds flow or the bids for certain grants are presented, and we're so close. We can't let C5 set us back, and so we're not going to let it. Yeah, we're not going to.
Awesome. I mean, just think about this: everything that happens in DC on Capitol Hill, what if it was all on the blockchain, and normal Americans could see what is actually happening. So,
yeah. I think it'll take some time, but they're warming up to it. I'm slowly warming up to it.
So let's definitely switch some gears. Let's talk about building out a Web3 community. You got a great one with the Citizen Warrior Foundation. How did you guys build this Web3 community?
So any community, to build any community would take alliances with people with existing groups, and then essentially, so let's say you have a group that believes in XYZ, and XYZ all has shared first principles, although their missions are different. If you have shared first principles and you say, okay, the vision is the same, while the explicit goals, right, may be different, in kind, the principles are the same. So the vision, you all want to go to the same place. Mm-hmm. It's about establishing, the best way to do it, right? So the least capital intensive, right? And also the most inspiring way to do it. is to find partners or affiliates with existing communities that share and legitimately share the same ethos. So you're not like trickling airdrop promises, like this type of thing. Like has to like that. It just, I don't like it. I don't like it. So it's like what you do is really how you build a civilization. I mean, we can go really, kind of.
We can definitely go deep on this.
So I mean, establish a transcendent value. This is the most important thing, right? In the secular way, just think about secular. This is truth, right? So truth is the most important. Or let's say mitigating meaningless suffering is the most important thing. Or let's say truth doesn't mitigate meaningless suffering. And then say that there's these three objectives. One is education. One is community building. One is R&D into goods and services. Okay, now that's what these three groups have, all for that one reason, for the pursuit of truth, to mitigate meaningless suffering. Then you bring them in, and it just takes a few connections, but it's a few connections gained over time. So a lot of people, they put in a lot of effort. It's like they're sprinting like a 20-yard dash, blah, 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 blah. And then it's like they're not getting this vision of like all this material reward as a result of that dash. I'm like, dude, I dash in the morning before the sun comes up, and I don't expect anything other than to hydrate afterwards. If I have my water on me. So it's like to be able to teach people the idea, especially the youth right now who are building this, who are really going to innovate the Web3, is just to teach the idea of like there is this 1%, over time, exponential growth until you hit the bottom of the S curve, and then whoosh like this. So it's to embrace failure as so like how do you build a community? Is just to go for that, right? So establish the first principles, look for the other groups, and then reach out to them and fail and fail and fail. Do capital unintensive failure, repeated over time without losing pace, and you'll have your community. And we're, of course, still working on growing ours, right? I mean, we need to be a formidable force because right now, Web 2 and the corporate press controls the narrative. And insofar that Web 2 and corporate press controls the narrative, mass adoption of emergent tech is going to be slowed. So we need to override algos. We need to set what's trending, right? And we can only do that through numbers. And so it's become an imperative in our opinion.
So you've mentioned a few times about the younger generation, Gen Z, that are just all over this Web3 space.
All over.
So want to kind of shift into that. For somebody looking at getting into a crypto, blockchain, Web3 career that just sees it as an exciting space, like what kind of advice would you have for them to grow or get into that career?
So it's like pre or post college.
Let's go with pre-college and then let's go with post-college. So let's go somebody looking at getting into the Web3 space pre-college. What advice would you give them?
Pre-college. Well, so I mean, I would tell them consider perhaps delaying college because unless you're getting into the top 10 universities, right, or top 20, let's say international, right, or unless you're getting into university that tapping into that alumni network is just VC money backing, just like it's going to be awesome, right? So I mean, essentially, you're going into university, you're going to pick up like the risk of substance abuse, which travels with you, right? You're going to pick up other high risk behaviors, so you're going to be very on risk as an asset standpoint. Okay. Now, if you want to de-risk for a little bit and say, okay, well, what can I accomplish on my own? So at home, well, you don't have overhead. When you're 18, maybe you're going to move out. You're not going to move out. Maybe you have a home. So let's say you have a home, and this is the kid we're talking about. He's got 4 years. Okay. So what do you do? Number one, dive into the white paper initially of Satoshi because he set the dream. So just give the guy credit. And then move over. There's a lot of Web3 development, smart contracts, Solidity programs out there. The more official bodies, I think that their information is much lower value than the less official bodies and the smaller companies looking to emerge. Like we're partnering with some of them because we want to create a pipeline. Like, dude, you just graduated high school and like you have a knack for, let's say, coding. Well, boom, right here. It's like $1,000. And if it works for you, then boom, you can get a contract job off the back. And if that works for you, then here's these other areas of code that you want to learn. But then once you learn the smart contract gig, like you have to pull into the substrate, right? Understand the blockchain architecture, understand what you're building on. And so the idea would be to, with the least amount of capital, to be able to obtain the most amount of knowledge that's at the highest amount of demand, that in the immediate term, I mean, within a year turnover from starting learning, you could be a top earner. So if you knew anything about finance, so if you took let's say you took an accounting course and you took a small investment course, and then you did a little trading on the side for like 3 months, and you're trading with $500, let's say, and now you're moving into the Web3 smart contract place. An investment bank could pick you off for $250 a year, your first year, and they're hungry for those people. The supply does not meet demand, so that would be my suggestion.
I think that's a great suggestion. And I've seen some of those like offers from definitely in the elite banks come in and are just like, hey, you understand this stuff? We love you. So let's shift gears. Same question. Like, you've graduated college or you're mid-career. What kind of advice would you give to somebody that, actually, let me just say that. If you're out of college or even in your 30s, what kind of advice would you give to somebody that would like to get into the Web3 space?
So I guess it depends how much capital they have, right? So like by the mid-30s, you could be capital flush depending on what you did prior, or you could be living paycheck to paycheck, right? So I mean, let's say you're capital flush, go the VC angle, look at early seed, especially now during the bear market, and because not a lot of people are there, we'll talk about on the other end. So then it's so you're not capital flush, and you're looking to increase. Well, so you should always be looking to increase your market value, however you do. And ultimately, so there's a temperamental divide as to who ends up assuming risk and then would become an entrepreneur. And then also you have to say, okay, well, does this person have a family? Do they have a mortgage? Like, what are their obligations and how risk on can they be? But to move into this space relative to if it's digital marketing and just promoting these services, if you can, there's what we call like human capital arbitrage plays right now, if you want to call it like that. I mean, I don't know what you would call it, but it is raising all boats. So in the end of the day, like, it doesn't bother me. Like, like a lot of my team is overseas, and I love them, and I treat them like they're more loyal than I could ever expect to just have as a standard, right? So they're as loyal or more loyal than what I was used to in the past. Let me put it that way. And so it's like there's so many opportunities right now. Focused on emergent tech, you're going to be focused on the area where demand is going to increase, and the supply will increase as far as the people who are pursuing this are going to be doing. So I hope as few people could do it, so we take the space. No, I'm kidding. No, a lot of people are going to go move into the space, and the sooner you get in, the better. So what should you do? Just understand the basics, and then choose a domain where you want to insert yourself. Is it the digital marketing promoting the emergent tech? Is it going to be on the sales side selling the emergent tech? Is it moving in an entrepreneurial space, doing a small startup? I would stay away from the DAO. If you're going to do a DAO, I would incorporate outside the States. Look at Dubai, look at Isle of Man, look at Singapore, among some other areas that we can discuss. If you're looking at doing setting up a small little trade, outfit, right, with digital assets, or working on these. These kids are very smart now, machine learning and AI and stuff like that, and they have like these signals that they sell. Subscription-based services are absolutely phenomenal. I would say look at Puerto Rico Act 60. A confidant of mine helped set up the original Act 20, Act 22, and Act 60 now is sort of an amalgamate. It's kind of a combination plus. The thing is, PR got sort of battered, so you have to keep that in mind, right? But
hurricane zones.
Yeah, no, it's not doing. Yeah, it's got hit a lot. But I mean, there are ways to get around, right? And so that you can help the Puerto Rican people, which is great, and you could also pay 4% corporate income tax, 0% capital gains, 0% of distributions if you're a resident there, 18% if you're not. So it's just like, seek low capital ventures that bear high capital post-tax outcomes.
Awesome.
But by focusing on emergent tech.
Great advice. And you said that you've hired some really, really amazing people.
Yes.
What's the secret to hiring amazing people in the Web3 space?
Firing often. Really? Yeah, no, it's almost impossible to be a good hirer, in my opinion. I've had to. So in my former life, we had a few hundred employees around the world, and the amount of bad actors that came out of that, I mean, it's just accounted for a lot of losses. Let's put it that way. So it's always very hard to hire well. It's most important to identify when you need to terminate, and then to do so like that. And that means you have a system in place That means that you've given them every opportunity, right? So you're not just picking off people saying, all right, you're cast aside, this guy's garbage, this guy's garbage. No, nothing like that. Like you've your systems. You've broken everything down to process systems, process maps into every activity, policy relative to every decision that's being made. I mean, everything is set up so that all they need to do is grind and execute, right? Now, if they're not willing to grind and execute and they're bringing a mindset in there that's now, it's like a pathology that's spreading throughout their department or cross-departmental even, right? So you have your marketing, you have sales, now your entire biz dev unit is just whoosh in the mind, right? It's get rid of them. And then through iteration over time, you're going to learn maybe do better qualification, like do better background checks and go really deep, but that requires capital and time, right? So it's like, for me, it's like for the guys just getting started, just know when to quit, say adios and bring on the next guy. And even having them come on for a trial period, that helps. But yeah, I mean, there's Upwork, right? There's TopTal. There's a whole bunch of companies right now that are sourcing internationally, or you can just go and see who's bidding on these works. I mean, that's what I would the most strategic approach. Who's bidding on this stuff? Who's showing what projects that they've produced? And you're like, wow, I really like that. I really like that. I really like that. And then you reach out and you see what they're doing, and then maybe you can form your own hub internationally.
Awesome. So switching gears, this is a question that I ask like every single one of my guests. What is a book or books that has had the biggest impact on your career?
Wow, that's okay. So books, yeah, that's gonna be very tough. A lot, I'd say, The Moral Animal by Robert Wright. That was really big for me. My background was behavioral neuroscience, so it spoke to me like really loudly. I mean, for me, this might sound cheesy, but depends on the translation, of course, the English translation. But like the Tao, right? Or people call it the Tao or something, but like whatever, the Tao. The Tao Te Ching, the Bible to me was very instructional as to how to lead a good life, burn off dead wood, right? Kind of be born anew in the day. And when something goes wrong, look inside before you say, this is the guy who did it wrong. Say, no. How did I contribute to whatever happened? And it was ways to just create a sense of it rooted me to the ground, But then also, I mean, like Carl Jung, right, and his understanding of the shadow and the need to integrate it, or else it would be presented by the will to power, and it would be like authoritarian type tendency, which we want to avoid. So specific books. Yeah, the moral. If you're going to pick any, The Moral Animal, read the Bible, even if you're secular, because as long as you get a good translation, you'll get something out of it, I promise. And the Tao Te Ching. It's really, I mean, really, the world religions are just fantastic. They're fantastic because then you have a worldly world. You establish a broad worldview whereby you can speak to anybody. If you can speak to people who are, in the 3 Comma Club and who are living paycheck to paycheck, and you can move as like a Sigma male, across these different hierarchies or meta hierarchies, and do so seamlessly, and then have that carry humility with you. Be truthful of your faults, right? And look to always strengthen your areas of weakness, because those are all opportunities. Then these people will gravitate to you. And then your success is almost, if you live rightly or righteously, the outcome or the likelihood of you having a good, for you to be able to achieve your vision of what you want your life to be is as ensured as any preparation can set you up for. In my experience and in the experience of pretty much, I mean, a lot of the guys that I know that like literally were born on a dirt floor, like their house was on a dirt floor, like outside of a major city in like the MENA area or whatever. And they own companies in the hundreds of millions of dollars because they learned how to grind, but also because they were men of integrity, So
awesome. That's great.
That'd be my answer.
And I got one more question for you before I let you go. If you can go back and talk to yourself and give yourself a piece of advice in the days that you were just getting involved in the Web3 space, what would you tell yourself?
like actually go back in a time machine?
If you can go back in a time machine and tell yourself, like right when you were getting in or, prior to getting in, like what advice would you give yourself?
I mean, I would just, put as much money as I can to pay advertising and tell everyone to be very weary of these CFI protocols.
Okay.
But aside from that, I mean, because that's what jumps to mind. I'm just like the CFI SOP. Start slow. Yes. Identify the innovators of highest integrity first. Don't jump into everything because there's 85% garbage. It took me a long time to figure this out, really. And then longer than it should have. And then 15% that is just absolute genius. The spread on that is insane. I say, separate the wheat from the chaff. Take as much time as you need to before deploying capital, be it human, intellectual, or financial. And really be able to separate what the future is from what's being hyped or what's the FOMO of the moment. And then foster the relationships there as opposed to spreading yourself out thin. Because I took a cost, of time, of resources by spreading myself thin. So that would be, I'd say, the other than the C5 things, like what that, the big publication, would be to say that. That would have saved a lot of time and we'd be further along.
I think that's great advice. Is there anything else that you'd love to share with the listeners before we let you go?
Maybe just one thing.
Okay, fire.
Thank you. So yeah. We're crowdsourcing specific intel relative to the Celsius Network case, and this is very important. It's not that we're ever going to go public per se, but that this information would be used to help secure a proper bid process and attract the right bidders and allow for better terms and outcome for the depositors who are now unsecured creditors, which is such an absurd, oh my God. So we don't want to see this be a setback for the whole emergent tech space or the crypto sphere in general. And also, these people do need help. And unless external VC funding comes in, fills the gap, we already have the connections who can create the proposals and get people as whole as possible. This is absolute. But the leverage points are, we have X, Y, and Z that we can deploy at any time, right? So there's incentives. There's incentives to bring people to the table. So we've already identified them. It's on our link tree. If you happen to have that information, anonymous upload. And that would really help making the depositors as whole again as quickly as we could possibly manage it as possible. That's that I just had to squeeze that.
Definitely. And I will make sure to have the link tree in the show notes.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate it. Hey, we all do it. So it sits in there. Thank you.
Well, Mike, I'm definitely excited about having you on this show. Thank you for being an awesome guest. And for the listeners, until next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Decentralized Careers Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.